All right, Rabbi Michael Lerner is our guest today. He's an American political activist, author, and the editor of Tikkun magazine. His newest book, Revolutionary Love, calls for a new consciousness to save our planet. The goal of this new consciousness is to create the caring society. The vehicle to create this new consciousness he calls the Love and Justice Movement. Rabbi Lerner calls for a radical agenda to address the spiritual and psychological needs that both the left and the right have been unable to meet. Welcome to the Growing Down podcast.
Hey, hi.
So, Rabbi Lerner, thank you again so much for being on the show. Obviously, this is a very interesting time in our America's history, and you've been involved as an activist all the way back to your Berkeley days, it sounds like.
Actually, only since I was 21. But that was a long time ago. 1964.
Oh, okay. So with this going on in your history of being involved in the movement, and obviously your new book, Revolutionary Love, where do you see the Black Lives Matter movement right now and what's going on? Just sort of a take on your perspective today throughout, and connecting that back to your history involved with activism. What's changed? What hasn't changed?
Well, a lot hasn't changed. I mean, a lot of similarities between now and previous moments that I've been involved. So I'll start with that. I got moved most and at first by attending, walking with in the March on Washington in 1963, at which Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And so when I went to, I was an undergraduate at Columbia, and when I went to graduate school at the University of California in Berkeley, I encountered the movement on campus. It was basically a movement to support the desegregation of businesses in the Berkeley area and in the Bay Area as a whole. And so we were organizing on campus for an end to segregation in the hiring and of businesses in the Bay Area. And the university forbade that to happen. They said, you can't advocate on campus for any off-campus illegal activity. Now, we were doing sit-ins, so that was an illegal activity. We were sitting in businesses to challenge their segregation. So I got involved right then in that movement that was called the Free Speech Movement. I was very deeply into that until we won. As it turned out, we won the battle after they had arrested an awful lot of people or whatever. But so next, so my start was really around supporting the civil rights movement. But as I learned quickly that you couldn't separate civil rights here from civil rights elsewhere. And so myself and my roommate, Jerry Rubin, created in the spring of 65, we created a teach-in on the war in Vietnam. And it was at that teach-in that I learned more and more about American domination of the world and why it wasn't good for the world. And it wasn't good for us either. In the next year after that, Jerry Rubin and I created the idea asking African-American leadership in SNCC and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and other civil rights organizations in the South that had told their white members, go away. We want our organizations to be about Black power, and we don't want your organizations to be dominated by white people. But they then, so people would risk their lives, in some cases given their lives. So some of those people said, well, what should we do? And they said, what you need to do is to organize white people. Don't come and try to organize Black people. Don't try to organize people of color. Go to white people and organize them. So we decided, okay, we'll create a teach-in about Black power, so that to help people understand why it was that the world needed Black power, and yet at the same time, we weren't trying to organize Black people, we were organizing white people. Well, nevertheless, there was a group of people who turned to us, Black people around us, who turned to us and said, you have no right to do this. This is our issue, right? So here we were, and it highlighted a very important early truth. Namely, when somebody says to you, follow Black leadership, you have to say, you know, that's not an adequate guide, because there are Blacks who are take one path and Blacks who take another path. It's not enough to say I'm following Black leadership. You have to ask which of those leaderships, and we have to then decide amongst the various leaderships which are the voices that we want to listen to, because each one of those voices will be saying, listen to us. So the voice that said, go organize white people, and you organize it and teach them about what's going on in terms of the lives of Black people, that's what we were doing. But there were other Black people who were saying, no, that's our task, we're going to do that. So that showed me that there was a problem in saying, listen to the most oppressed. Turns out that the most oppressed are people who are the absolute experts on describing and witnessing and experiencing their own experience of oppression. But to be oppressed doesn't necessarily mean you're the expert on how to get out of the oppression, okay? Actually, there's not a lot of good evidence that people who are oppressed are the best strategists for getting out of that oppression, okay? In fact, if we were to say where we are right now, we would say that is not the case, okay? And I learned this in another way, because I was watching soon thereafter, already by 1967, the actions of the state of Israel, when after defending itself from what seemed like a reasonable need to defend itself in 67, they had conquered the parts of the West Bank and Gaza, and instead of at that point turning around to Palestinian refugees and saying, okay, we clearly showed our strength. Now we want to invite you back. We want to bring back people. We want you to be able to go back to your homes. We want to act in a generous way. They acted in a way which has led to the last, whatever number it is, from 67 to now, number of years in which Israel occupied and in many cases brutalized Palestinians. So, and that was our response to our oppression. That was a bad response. It wasn't a smart response. In other words, Israelis are largely still a traumatized people. People in trauma are not necessarily the smartest people to know how to get out of the trauma. All right. So I've had a long history, okay, around these issues of experiencing both the legitimate desire of people for liberation and their self-defeating paths that they often take. And I say I learned it from the Zionist movement and what Jews did, but then I saw the same thing happening in almost every movement I've been part of. So I don't want to try to take up all the time giving you my history, except to say, I'll just give a few little highlights, namely that I was chair of Berkeley Students for Democratic Society from 1966 to 68. And then after sending my draft card back to the draft board and telling them that if you draft me, I'll either go to Canada or I'll go into the army and organize against you in the army and organize against the war. And then in 69, I ended up being a professor or a visiting professor of philosophy. My PhD was in my first PhD was in philosophy, and at the University of Washington. And I organized a big demonstration that against the war and against racism. That demonstration at the federal courthouse was attacked. We're standing around. We had wanted to do a teach-in with the judges, and we sent them information saying, "Here's what we want to do. We'll be down there on such and such a time." Instead of them wanting to hear any of us, the doors were locked, and suddenly, as we're milling around waiting for, trying to decide what to do, the police come attacking us, hundreds of them attacking us. Well, in the melee that followed that, there was some rocks thrown at the courthouse windows and paint thrown at on the courthouse. And I got indicted by the as part of what they then called the Seattle Seven for two things. Crossing state lines, using the facilities of interstate commerce with the intent of inciting to riot, and conspiracy to destroy federal property, namely So in the course of the trial, in the midst of this trial, one of their undercover agents, because you always have some undercover agents who are going to be the ones who are saying, "Throw the rocks," who are the ones who are going to go and be the ones breaking the windows, as they are doing right now. Many of them some of the people are real regular demonstrators, but they've been incited to do it by police who are there looking like. And I remember the day after that happened, when the demonstration happened, since I was the professor who was involved and sort of the most famous person, the media said, "What do you have to say about all this?" And I said, "I deeply regret the destruction of any property that was destroyed." However, today, in the same time, the United States destroyed not only the same amount of way more property in bombing in Vietnam, but also hundreds of lives. And so then I go to a meeting of some of the activists that night, and one guy stands up and in a very attractive but nevertheless hippie outfit and looking, says, "Who the hell gave Professor Lerner the right to apologize for us? What we did was the best thing ever. We should be proud of ourselves for standing up and breaking, throwing those rocks, etc." He, at the trial, he turned out to be one of the undercover agents who testified against us. And but another undercover agent under cross-examination, but he was somebody who wasn't in the employ of the government. He was somebody who had volunteered for the government to infiltrate us and report on what we were doing. Under cross-examination, he admitted that the FBI had bought and brought the paint to throw on the building, and that the FBI had brought the rocks, because there are no rocks in downtown Seattle. If you've ever been there, it's all paved over. You can't find a rock if you wanted to throw it. The government had brought them there. Okay, well, so my notion of what the government can do, I had personal experience of, right? Didn't keep me from getting sent to federal penitentiary for a while for contempt of court. Now, of course, I had a lot of contempt for that court, I have to admit, but that the actual basis that they had for it was ludicrous, and it was overturned a few months later. It was overturned, but for a while I was inside this federal penitentiary. And I got to see something else that I would have never believed, which is I knew that the left had a line that said, oh, all the people in prison are really, a lot of them are really good people. They haven't done very much or evil or whatever, or their life circumstances caused them to be there. And I didn't believe it. I was scared to death to go into that prison. Okay. I was very unhappy about it. Didn't want to be in there. Federal penitentiary. But actually, I did meet a lot of people after the first part, in which I was kept in solitary. But then eventually, when it turned out that I wasn't going to be let out right away, they let me out into the larger conversation, and to be, to have some time to be in the with other inmates. And I met a lot of people, and they seemed like wonderful people. And I talked to them about what they had done, and so, et cetera. And most of the circumstances led me to believe that the left was not lying about who is in prison. So I also had the experience of there were a core of Nazis in that prison also, people who hated Jews and so forth, and hated demonstrators, hated lefties of any sort, and they wanted, I was at that point the most famous prisoner in there, because our trial had been covered by on the news and the television news every day for the weeks that it was going on. So what was I going to do when these people wanted to kill me? Well, the answer was I was protected by the Black Panthers in the prison, because they knew that I had been working with the Black Panther Party before going there. The part of my demonstration that I had organized was in defense of Bobby Seale, who was the chair of the Panther Party. And so I saw in real terms what solidarity meant. Solidarity meant that they got into the fights with these people rather than me, who was basically a chicken shit, who was not the kind of person who knew how to fight or anything like that. Anyway, so again, I had a sense of strong solidarity and caring about the African Americans who were in prison, and many of them being people who had gotten there because they wanted to stand up and defend their own people. Just what the Jews had wanted to do when we defended, when we tried to create a state of our own to protect ourselves, because during the Holocaust, one out of every three Jews alive on this planet in 1940 was murdered by 1945. So Jews needed something like a state for protection, and I wish that the African Americans had found a way to get a state for themselves. If there's one point when some people in the Black community are saying, yeah, we should have the several states in the South as our states, and be given to us so we can create a separate nation, a Black nation here. Anyway, so moving right along, I would say, yeah, I'm deeply concerned about Black lives and Black Lives Matters, and want to struggle on their behalf. However, I wanted to say one other thing. We will never win that battle unless we have a lot of white people on our side, unless we have a lot of white people who understand why racism is not in their interests. And it was this that led me to decide to try to understand what was driving white people. Why were white people, particularly in the late 70s and early 1980s, when Reagan was elected, why would they vote against their own economic interests? How could they be so silly or stupid? And so I had, after getting out of prison, I went and got a second PhD in clinical psychology to try to understand the dynamics. And what I learned in that, so then after I got that second PhD, I was able to get a research grant from the National Institute of Mental Health. J. Edgar Hoover, when I was on prison, had said, Michael Lerner is one of the most dangerous criminals in America. Now, I had never done anything. I had never thrown a rock. I had never done any act of violence, but I could see where he was coming from because I had been able to reach and speak to people in a way that moved them. And that was what made me dangerous. I don't know, I didn't deserve one of the most dangerous, but anyway, I could see where he thought I was a little dangerous. So it was amazing that to me that after getting this PhD, that I got a grant from the National Institute of Mental Health to study the psychodynamics of work and family life. And my particular interest in that was to focus on understanding why people were moving who were working class people, because this was focused on middle income working people, not upper middle class people, not students from wealthy families or anything, but working class people. Now, not just white working class people, but also people of color, but nevertheless, listening to them about why some of them were moving to the right. And eventually this research involved talking to and interviewing thousands of people. It was a very big grant. And anyway, so, and what I learned was this, that many people who have encountered the left have felt disrespect. They felt that the people on the left didn't really understand them and disrespected them. And that was a major thing. I couldn't understand how they thought that, but as they told me their stories, I began to understand it. Now, one part of that had to do with the fact that many of those people, including people in the people of color, had an affinity with some kind of church or some kind of religious practice. And what they found in the left was that if you hung out with left people, the left was very clear it wanted people who were religious to join our demonstrations and become part of our movement. But when you hang out with them, you hear people making comments, the conclusion of which was something like this: yeah, we want them to be with us, but basically we think that their religious stuff is ludicrous, ridiculous, and it just shows why they're working class people, because they're less intelligent than us. If they were more intelligent, they would evolve eventually. Maybe if they hang out with us long enough, they will evolve to a higher level of consciousness in which they'll see that all that religious stuff and spiritual stuff is nonsense. There's no place in the life of any serious person, and they'll become like us. So that was experienced by people who heard that, and they heard it in a whole variety of different ways, but that was basically what they were telling us they were hearing in left circles, made them feel like, hey, these people have nothing but contempt for us. Even though they want us to be in their movement, they actually think that we're in a lower place than them. So that was an eye-opener to me, that they would think that. At a certain point in the process of doing this thing, I didn't come from a family that wore a kippah, a head covering, the traditional Jewish, it's called, in English they call it yarmulke, but in Hebrew it's kippah, something. I didn't come from that family, but I was moving towards wanting to do that. So I asked the people in the groups, what would you feel like if I were to wear a kippah? Would you feel like less trusting me? And they said, no, on the contrary, we trust religious people a hell of a lot more than we trust a psychologist or a social activist. So, all right, that was good information to have. So I stopped worrying about that. The other thing happened is that the first week I started to wear this, somebody stops me in the street in Berkeley and says, "Take off the cap, kike." Okay, now I'd never heard anybody say that before, but that's because I wasn't out as a Jew. The second I got out as a Jew, it was like the same thing that Black people experience all the time when they're out as Black, because they're or out as a Chicano, or a Latino, or out as an Asian American. When you can be seen that way right away, you're much easier to be a target. So, and that actually convinced me to stay with this. I wanted to understand it and experience what it was like to be out as a Jew. And I had a second experience a week later with somebody else doing the same thing, stopped at us at a stoplight, and somebody's knocking on the door of my car and saying, "Get out of here, we don't need any Jews around here." In Berkeley, California, you never think it would happen, but it happens. Anyway, moving right along, I learned something very important about the way that people felt disrespected. Now, there was another element to this. Well, all right, on the religion element, there was something else first, which was that what I learned in talking to people and raising these issues to them about was that about why they would care about their religion is I learned that many people have a desire for some kind of higher meaning and purpose to their lives than the ethos of the capitalist marketplace. Because the capitalist marketplace puts forward the notion that what everybody really wants is more money and more money and power. So, but I listened to people as they started to talk about their lives deeply. And what I learned was, no, a lot of people would like to live in a world where there's something else besides money and power to guide their lives and to guide the lives of others. So I would ask them, and our other interviewers, because I had a whole team of researchers who were doing this with. So we would ask them, okay, well, why don't you say something to your fellow workers about wanting that kind of higher meaning and purpose and being fed up with the way that the world of work is organized? And their answer was like this: I hate living in this kind of a world, but everybody else is so selfish and materialistic that there's no chance of changing anything. So we'd say to them something like, well, where'd you learn that from? They'd say, well, everybody's taught us that from the very earliest times we were kids, that we should, that this is what people are like and that we need to protect ourselves. And I've come to believe that that's really true. And we're saying, oh, well, you've internalized a key message of the capitalist system. So, and they didn't realize that until they started to think about it that way. But then I said, but anyway, okay, so these people don't respect you so much, but why would you go to the right when they disrespect you even less? And so they told me another thing that became critical in my understanding of what's going on in the society, and it was this. Now, this wasn't so easy to get to, but people got it and talked about it a lot. They believed another key element of the capitalist, the ideology of capitalism, the worldview of capitalism. And that other element is this, that this is a meritocracy, and that, in other words, it's a society based on merit, a meritocracy. And so if your life isn't so fulfilling, either in the world of work or in family life, there's nobody to blame but yourself. You screwed it up. You could have had any life you wanted, but you screwed it up. You failed in some way or other, something that you did wrong. Now, as we started to explore this theme of self-blaming, we began to see that huge parts of the population hold a self-blaming story. I've come to believe that almost everybody with incomes below, let's say the top 10% of income earners, hold a self-blaming story that goes something like this. If only I had, and then they fill it in a lot of different ways. If only I had studied harder when I was in high school or in college. If only I had not goofed off. If only I had been more subservient to my first boss. If only I had whatever. And people have huge varieties of how that is filled in. But the conclusion is, I screwed up. I was a failure because, women often had this version of that story said, if only I were more attractive, if only I had been born with if my parents had taught me how to have more charm to charm men or whatever. Whatever, in other words, wide variety of contents, but everybody having filled in their self-blaming story. Now, their self-blaming story is exactly what the ruling elites of this country want you to have. They want you to feel that it's your fault that you're not getting what you want. And that message is drilled into us from the earliest time we get into kindergarten. Hey, study hard here, learn what we have to teach, because you can be the president of the United States someday. You know, and boy, when Obama became president, boy, did that get reinforced dramatically for everybody. Hey, you could have been him. Well, but the truth of the matter is that there's a class structure in the society, that there's that yes, there are some people who can move up the ladder. A very small percentage of people can do that. And they get held up to you as the example of what could have happened to you. But it doesn't happen to you. It couldn't possibly happen to you unless some other people went down the class ladder. Okay, so it's and studies that have been done. The New York Times actually did a systematic study back in 2008 in which it showed that the amount of class mobility was like 3% over the course of the last 40 years. Okay, very small percentage of people were able to move themselves up from, let's say, poor to working class, or working class to more successful, or more successful in the working class to being a professional, or up from the professional to being an actual owner of capital. Very, very small percentage of people. So, but they're carrying this self-blaming story around. Now, I came to the conclusion very quickly, then the left has to challenge that publicly. It has to make this a focus of our public discourse to help people understand that it's not your fault, that you were, now we were up against also not only the teachings from the school and reinforced in the media daily in every kind of sitcom, and the idea that some people are going to have more power over others, but it was also it was so deep inside people, and so we needed to have a counter message that no, it's not a meritocracy, and that you are just as smart often. I mean, let's say and there were tests that proved this, that the distribution of smarts is just equal in the working class as it is from the ultra rich. It's just that they know they've had the advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you see it, of knowing how to dominate and control and get power over other people. So we were trying to help people understand that. And what our studies showed was that when you decreased self-blaming, you increased sense of power in people, their sense of efficacy, their ability to act with power or effectiveness in the world. And similarly, when you decrease self-blaming, you decrease family pain, because when people feel terrible about themselves and they don't have the power to act it out in the world of work, where do they act it out? On their kids and sometimes on their spouse. So over a large number of people, we got to show that if you decrease their self-blaming, you increase their power and you increase their ability to have fulfillment in their personal life. But this is a tough one to get through to people because there's pop psychology and pop religion, and both of them have the same bad meritocratic message. And it goes like this: you created your own reality and you can change it just by yourself. Well, it turns out that certainly we participate in creating the reality we live in, but we live in a world in which, as we see it now in this most dramatically, but we're seeing it in the 60s and 70s and 80s, there's a racism. That racism is not going to go away because you decided you wanted to be to take care of yourself. It doesn't go away, and it creates a tremendous barrier between people. And similarly, there's a class structure that makes it very, very hard for people to change their circumstances, no matter how smart they are or how hard they work. But people on top were saying, no, you're there because that's where you deserve to be. And so people went to the right. Why'd they go to the right? Because the right had a different message. The right said to them, you're in pain in this society. Okay, now that was already something important to recognize and acknowledge. And it's not your fault. Now, those two messages are enough to have given tremendous credibility to the right for people who are in pain and feeling like it was their fault. But then what the right does, and this is it says, whose fault it is? It's the fault of the demeaned others of our society. They don't use the word demeaned others. They say African Americans, Native Americans, people of color, refugees, feminists, liberals, progressives, all these others, and you could go on and name many others, right? All the gays and lesbians, and they have a whole list of who's to blame, and they keep on expanding it. Okay, but in other words, you deflect this onto these others and say they're the ones who are screwing up your life. They only care about themselves. They're the source of selfishness. Now, this is ironic because, of course, the capitalist order is the major source of selfishness. It's the source that says we who have more power and more wealth than everybody else in the society. Okay, there are 3 people in the country, and I'm forgetting their names at the moment, but 3 people in the country have more wealth than the bottom 50% of population. Okay, these 3 people own more wealth than the 50% of the population. Can you believe it? But it's true, and it's so you can't get there. You can't move up into that ladder. But they want you to feel like, there's the reason why you're there is because these other people are screwing it up. The people of color, the women who are feminists, the gays and lesbians, and the list goes on and on. The Jews, the Muslims, the people who are seeking asylum here. They're all the people who are going to screw everything up and undermine because they just care about themselves. They don't care about you. So an effective liberal and progressive movement has to challenge the meritocracy on the one hand, but also the explanation of why people are in the situation they're in by helping them understand what really generates selfishness is the ethos of the capitalist marketplace. Because day in and day out, people are in a workplace where their only value is judged by how much they are going to contribute to the old bottom line. So eventually, we started Tikkun magazine, T-I-K-K-U-N. Tikkun is the Hebrew word. It means to heal, repair, and transform the world. It started out as a liberal Jewish magazine, but now it's interfaith and welcoming to secular humanists who have no religious commitment whatsoever, don't believe in any kind of spiritual dimension. But so Tikkun, you can look it on the web at tikkun.org, Tikkun.org. Tikkun was a way for us to try to put these ideas out into the world and spread the ideas and teach people about about what we had learned. And that is, so undermining self-blaming, helping people, affirming people's desire for some higher meaning and purpose in life, challenging the class structure, and recognizing that the pain comes from the capitalist order, and that if you see people around you who are selfish, I mean, we asked those people, I said, well, they said, well, everybody's selfish in the society. We asked them, are your friends all, think of your top 10 friends. Are they all selfish? And they think about it for a while, and then they come back and say, no, they're not selfish. It's just everyone else who's selfish, okay? So that, in other words, they still held on to the belief that it was that way, even though their own experience was something different, right? And people just looking after themselves. Similarly, when in my new book, Revolutionary Love, a political manifesto to heal and transform the world, that new book brings up as examples many places in our lives where we've seen people go and risk their lives to save the lives of other people that they don't know, that they can care, that actually we can care for other people even if we don't know them. For example, in those people who came down to the burning towers in 9/11 and risked their lives going into those buildings, and over 300 of those who went in died as a result. Amazing acts of courage to go in and try to pull out people who were in these buildings. And so you can see it right in front of you that people were actually acting out of care for other people that they don't know. And so in any event, what I came to was understanding that we need a whole different way of thinking about what counts in this world. And I put it this way: we need a new bottom line. The old bottom line, the one that runs our institutions, is used by the corporations, is used by the media all the time, is the notion that you are productive, efficient, or rational to the extent that you maximize money and power. And the more money you have, then it looks like you're the more rational you are. They even have the media is filled with interviews with the richest people because they're supposed to be smartest because they got money. Okay, no, they're more ruthless, but that doesn't mean smarter. But in any event, so we need a new bottom line. And so what we've come up with in Tikkun and in the movement that I'm now calling a love and justice movement, and you can read about it in the book Revolutionary Love. But by the way, there's another Revolutionary Love book out by a woman, very nice woman, but it's not the book that that you need to get. You need to get the one from Michael Lerner, Lerner, that one. But in the book, I lay out what this new bottom line would look like. It's like this: let every institution, corporation, government policy, our healthcare system, our legal system, our education system, our cultural systems be judged efficient, rational, and productive to the extent that they maximize people's capacities to be loving and caring, kind and generous, ethically and environmentally sensitive, capable of supporting social and economic justice for all, and treating other human beings, seeing other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, rather than looking at every human being in your life, or most human beings, from the standpoint of what can you do for me? Will you do something to maximize my needs? And similarly, looking at the earth with awe and wonder and radical amazement at the grandeur of this universe and the mystery of it all, rather than looking at it and saying, gee, I wonder if there's something here I can turn into a product and sell and make a buck out of this earth. So this is a different bottom line, right? It's a new bottom line. And I could say it even in 60 seconds. I probably took a minute and a half now, but you can get into a 60-second soundbite. That new bottom line, actually, when people hear it, they say, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I'd love to live in a world like that. Only nobody will do it. It's unrealistic, so forget it. It'll never happen. And here, what I have to say is You know, when people say it's unrealistic, I want to say back to them, you never know what is possible until you struggle for what is desirable. Okay, you never know what is possible until you struggle for what is desirable. Because when Martin Luther King Jr. started to become part of a civil rights movement, most of the other Black ministers came to him and said, "Don't do this. You know, you're going to. There's no reason why you should ruin your credibility in the Black church by becoming politicized. Don't get involved in that struggle." Well, he refused to be realistic. Okay, and as a result, the movement that he helped support became extremely effective for the while that it was idealistic and fighting for fundamental change. And it won some things, although the things it won are now in danger of being taken away. But that's the story of what happens when you act in a put-downish way towards people who are not yet with you. I think I'm going to diverge here and go on to that theme for a second. I could also mention, look, the same thing happened with the women's movement. A small group of women, they're probably not more than 200 women in the 60s, who became feminists and said, we want to replace the patriarchy. We want women to have not just a legal right to vote, but we want to have women have equal rights to men. That those 200 women were continually being told, be realistic, it'll never happen. Don't you know, as one person's put it, dear, don't you know that patriarchy has been around for 10,000 years? You're going to change it? A bunch of women in Berkeley and in San Francisco and in New York and Cambridge and Ann Arbor and a few other places. You think you're going to change the world? But they did. Actually, they did. You never know what is possible until you struggle for what is desirable. But that won't happen right away. And for the first 10 or 15 years, you're going to do that. Everybody's going to say you're loco. But then after you get a lot of people behind you, then they turn around and say, oh yeah, well, that was inevitable. It was always going to happen that way. Okay, so they never credit the activists who are doing what they're doing. But to get back to this other theme of not putting down the people you need to influence, the left has been expert at putting down people who are not with us. And the most extreme example was in 2016, when 2 months before the election, Hillary Clinton says, yeah, the people who are not with us, 50% of them are a bundle of deplorables. Now, that message that she said publicly and so forth was picked up by the right, and they played that message on Fox News and on every possible right-wing radio station over and over again, day after day after day. And so when I went to interview people after the election about why they had voted the way in which they did, I'll just give you one example. A woman that I know who went down to the South to try to get people to support Hillary, and she was staying with close friends of hers who had been a liberal supporter during her college days. And as she was about to leave to go back to vote in her own state, she asked this woman, well, it's been very hard, but I hope at least you'll vote for Hillary. And the woman said, I haven't decided yet. So this was 2 days before the election. So she said, look, I know if you're saying you haven't decided yet, it means you're going to not vote for Hillary, you're going to vote for Trump. And the woman responded, you know, I haven't decided, I really haven't decided, but I'll tell you this, I'm not a deplorable. And so it's so widespread, and people heard that, and it so confirmed their feeling of what the left thinks about them, what the liberals think about them, that they are deplorable people. And this is extremely destructive. and undermines anything else that we have to say, because people don't care. If they agree with our programs, fine, they might agree with our programs, but when it comes down to the voting booth, they often vote for who they feel respects them, cares about them. And and so we need a different kind of social change movement that manifests that caring. I call it in the book, Revolutionary Love, I call it, we need to create the caring society, caring for each other and caring for the earth. I do think that there's a chance that some of these ideas will catch on eventually. But I do want to mention that one of the people who endorsed the book strongly is Keith Ellison. Now, Keith Ellison, you may know, is the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. And he is the one who just indicted the other 3 policemen who at first were not being charged in the case of the murder, the murder case. And he's going to be the chief prosecutor there. So if you'll bear with me 1 second, I want to get a copy of that book, and I'll tell you what he said about it.
Sure.
So here's Revolutionary Love. You can, if your local bookstore doesn't carry it, you can get it on an online bookstore, but make sure it's the Revolutionary Love from Michael Lerner, not from this other woman. But here's what he says. The caring society is the only realistic path for humanity to survive. And in Revolutionary Love, Rabbi Lerner lays out a powerful and compassionate plan for building that caring society. I love this book. Please read it and join with others to build the movement that enable those ideas to reshape our society, which so badly needs this vision. So that's what so if you respect one guy who was able to really stand up for Black Lives Mattering and act on it right away by indicting those other policemen who claimed, well, we didn't really do it. It was the one who was strangling George. So anyway, so this is a new way of thinking about politics. And if you want to know more about the book, you can go to tikkun.org/RLJ. LJ stands for love and justice, but tikkun.org//LJ. And you'll hear other people like, for example, who else endorses it? Gloria Steinem, you probably have heard of her. Cornel West, who is an African-American professor of African-American studies at Harvard, who wrote a book called Race Matters. And there are many. Anyway, if anything I said makes sense to you, go read it.
Absolutely, Rabbi. It's beautiful. I did have a question. I know you talked a little bit about the left sort of currently being split between like 2 parties, one being sort of corporate power, and you really endorsed. We were all Bernie supporters. You sort of promoted sort of the people power party. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about why does there seem, obviously the corporate versus non-corporate split is obvious, but do you have any other feedback into maybe why there is a split?
Well, I mean, there's a good reason for a split. And I hope one of the things I suggest is that we need to build a love and justice movement inside the Democratic Party and eventually either take it over or split from it. Because the way it is right now, the positions that we care about are continually shuffled aside. And I think, well, you know, I hope that Trump isn't reelected. But if he isn't reelected and Joe Biden is elected, we're going to see a lot of policies that are very disappointing to us. We need an active voice in that party and in the public arena challenging those policies. Even though we need, first of all, to get Trump out of the presidency. But the left may not ever get to the position of being that powerful, and part of the reason is it devours its own. It treats people on the left with disrespect, not just working class people, but right now, for example, there's a sub-campaign. The main campaign should be Black Lives Matters. We need to change the institutions of the world so that black lives are taken care of. And in Tikkun, you'll be able to find, if you just go to our website and then ask for put in your URL something about Black lives and what we need to do to defend them. And we have a whole platform around that. And our next issue of the magazine online, because the magazine is now online and not in print, is one that has an article by me at the beginning, an editorial that talks about what changes would be needed. A lot of people to this day are saying, we need system change, but often that only means system change in regard to how Blacks are treated in the judicial system. Very important, very, very important. But the system won't fundamentally change until we redistribute wealth in this country, until people have enough to live on. Anyway, but we're not going to get there. Why? Because a lot of people who are in the streets are, or at least on the Facebook, and because a lot of people think that they're Facebook activists, but what they do is they're engaged in this thing, not of putting down the real racists, but instead turning on each other and saying, you've got to renounce your white skin privilege. Okay, you've got to denounce that and learn to shut up and not talk out and not say anything, because who are you? You're a white guy or white woman. That is crazy. That's a crazy way to build a movement. What it does is, and I know this from interviewing people even here in Berkeley, people who were very much Bernie supporters, who are now saying, I just don't want to have anything to do with politics, because because when I put my face in there, they say I'm white. And in this case, the last I heard it was just a day ago. So a woman saying to me, I'm a white woman, and therefore I have no right to say anything because I'm white, and I should just shut up. And so that is so crazy and self-destructive. And the left is engaged in that at the same time that it's engaged in rightfully being in the streets, challenging the racism in the society. It's also turning against each other and making everybody feel unwelcome. Well, if you keep that up, we will not only lose the 2020 election, but we will totally destroy the good, loving energy that is right now out in the public sphere, saying we want to treat people of color as though they are equally valuable, and that they are, and that we love them and we want to protect them from the racism in this society. That's a loving message. But if you have a hateful message that's saying everybody who isn't one of the people of color is a bad person, it's a gift to the ruling elites of the country. Because what it does is it pushes people to say, well, if I'm not safe any place, I don't want to have anything to do with politics. And so you get masses of people who will not vote, will not go, so just say, a plague on both of their houses. I went to the left and they made me feel like I was a piece of garbage, because of my color of my skin. They're doing the same thing to me that the racists are doing to people of color. So now, obviously, there's a difference. Most people who are in the left don't feel that they're about to be attacked by policemen just randomly. Only in demonstrations they feel that way, but they don't feel that normally in their life. People of color often feel that on a day-to-day basis. They wonder about whether their particular teenage sons will come home alive after going to school or going to work or wherever. So it's a different level of craziness and hatefulness that people of color are facing. But still, if you want people to be on your side, don't make them feel bad about themselves. Don't say you're a bad person. On the contrary, see, even people who have bad ideas, we should be treating them with empathy, caring, curiosity about why they are not yet with us, rather than thinking that they are automatically an evil person. Because as I said, a lot of people who voted for Trump actually voted for Bernie in the 2016 in the 2016 primaries, and then they went to Trump. Why? Because they were not being respected by the mainstream of the Democratic Party and by ordinary people. And after the election, you ask most lefties, most liberals, why did you lose in 2016? Their answer, oh, that's simple. We lost because Americans are racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, or they're just plain stupid. Now, this goes back to the whole thing about self-blaming, because one of the parts of the self-blaming is you either didn't work hard enough or you weren't smart enough to make your life more a success. When you start saying to people that we see them as evil or stupid, you are pushing them towards the right, which says, no, you're not. It's just that those lefties and the people of color and whatever, they're bringing these messages to you, but we welcome you here. We need a welcoming message, a loving and caring message. And that's why the caring society that I describe in this book, Revolutionary Love, is something that should be the foundation for a new kind of left that could actually take a lot of the Bernie supporters and others and give them the tools to change the left. And you have to change the left before you can change the right, because I know, when we did these groups, people after the groups would say, okay, I want to get involved. Where do I go? Well, we weren't a political organization, so we said, well, check it out, what's available. So they'd go to some of those organizations, and they'd come back to us and say, we can't get involved because they don't like us. They don't think we're real. They would say, we want to organize the workers. And here I was a worker. They didn't bother to find out who I was, or what. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we want to organize the workers, and there are workers right there in your room that you're ignoring. So we need to build a kind of left that is supportive, loving, caring, kind, generous, not just aggressive, okay? But loving, caring, kind, and generous. So, yeah, my time is pretty much up, so you can say one more thing, but I
was just going to say you did a wonderful job in the book describing sort of spiritual progressivism, and I know I'm going to steal that line and identify with it because I think it really speaks to my heart about where the movement should go. I just wanted to say thank you for being on the show, and I know you shared where people could find you. Would you like to share again just where people could find you?
Well, number one, they could join. We are doing a training of how to be a spiritual progressive activist, and you go to the website spiritualprogressives.org/training. spiritualprogressives.org/training. The training is online, so you can be on it any place in the world. And right now we're in the middle of our third week of this 6-week online training. So, if you go to that place, you can put your name down to be notified when the next training is and how to get onto it. So spiritualprogressives.org, spiritualprogressives.org/training. You can read Revolutionary Love, and you can get it either at any online bookstores, or you can go to tikkun.org/LJ, love and justice. Tikkun, TIKKUN.org/LJ, love and justice. And I'd be delighted to get to know anybody who wants to be our allies, because we certainly want to welcome you. So thank you for doing this, and many blessings on your work.
Thank you, Rabbi.
so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.